All right, we're going to talk about the concept of business nexus. You're going to hear this phrase when discussing corporations pretty often. It comes up, where do you do business and what relation do you have in terms of tax liability to various states. And people call this different things, but commonly it's referred to as that you have a nexus in that state. The concept here is that the definition is that there's a minimum connection or presence that must exist before a state can try to nail you for sales tax. And they will, because it's a revenue stream for them. They will hit you up for sales tax if they think that you do enough business in their state. So what are the criteria that go into making the decision about whether or not you do enough business in their state? The first is, are you conducting sales or substantial sales there? The second is employees. Do you have an employee in that state? And the third is, do you own any property? Or do you have a building or a physical presence in the state? So when you ask about metrics, about kind of the threshold that it takes to satisfy any of these requirements, there's not that much concrete information out there, and the states are also slightly different. In general, if you're conducting a lot of sales, anything more than minimal sales in a state, if you're doing multiple contracts with folks that are based there, then it's a good idea to establish a nexus in that state. Certainly if you have employees that live or work in that state, that's a pretty definable threshold. And then also if you have an office or a warehouse or a distribution center or what have you in that state, that's also a fairly defined threshold. Then what you have to do is establish a business nexus. What that usually means is doing some sort of license, and it's usually a small nominal fee. So let's talk about maybe a quick example around business nexus. Let's say you're a Delaware C Corp and you have no presence in Delaware, and you don't fit any of these things. You don't sell to companies in Delaware, you don't have employees in Delaware, you don't have any property in Delaware, maybe your properties or your business is in Florida, but you chose to incorporate in Delaware, then you're not going to pay Delaware sales taxes because you don't have a nexus there. So what about if you have one sales guy working out of his house in Delaware? Then you would have to pay, you would have to establish a nexus there because you'd have an employee. What if you had multiple clients in the state of California and you were doing 15 contracts with 15 different clients? Then also you would have sales conducted in that state. You'd have to establish a nexus there. Interestingly, just because someone told you to incorporate in Nevada because they don't have any sales tax, that doesn't necessarily mean anything if you don't have a physical presence, employees, and you don't do any sales in Nevada. So if you're a company in the state of Utah, but you incorporated in Nevada, it doesn't matter. You're going to pay taxes where you have a nexus. You're going to pay sales taxes where you have a nexus. Also, the case law for the various states and the rules for the various states are different, so it's hard to make any, I don't mean to say that there's a broad truth about this subject. It still tends to be a somewhat quixotic subject. So really what it comes down to is it's a risk of versus energy question. You're essentially saying, how much of a risk of liability do I have in terms of sales tax if I don't file a nexus somewhere, and then how much energy and paperwork is involved in actually filing that nexus. States tend to not be super aggressive about coming after you, but it is looked on as a revenue stream. So you're going to have to weigh whether you fit these criteria or not inside of each state in which you do business.